Hi, Kamau. Katya Woods, the
Well,
Philadelphia Tribune. How are you?
well, thank you for talking to me. This is, yeah, I really appreciate it.
Of course. As you may be aware, this is a very hard story for our city. I'm a
Hmm.
Temple University alum. He spoke at my graduation in 1992. So is my husband, and my daughter now goes, and my sister graduated in '08.
Yeah, I mean, it
So
was important for us to actually film in Philly and talk to people in Philly. So there's a lot of Philly folks in there. I'm sure you recognize.
absolutely. One of the things that I love is that you did with this project, right? Whatever we may feel or whatever place in our heart he had, is that you did not, you showed the good and the bad. It wasn't like a
Hmm.
hit piece. Do you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
the other
Hmm.
thing is talk about why that is important, because you could have just been like, okay, we know this, Bill. Let's just get into the dirt.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there are times for that conversation. When I think about this documentary, there's two documentaries that are touchstones of what that sort of like guided my way. So one is Ezra Edelman's O.J. Simpson Made in America, which was about like to figure out what happened with OJ at this act that we sort of this through the crime. We got to look at his whole life and also look at America. Like if you really want to sort of understand what's going on here. And so that was sort of like a thing I saw, but well before I ever thought I could direct something like this, and just went, oh, that's the way you tell an interesting story. I think when many of us heard there's a 7.5 hour OJ Simpson doc, you're like, why would I want to watch that? And you press play, and within the first 10 minutes, you're like, oh, I get what's happening here. This is bigger than OJ. So that's one thing. And the other one is Dream Hampton Surviving R. Kelly, which really does focus mostly on the assaults and the crime, because I think that film's thing at that time was like, this is an active crime in progress, and I need your help in solving the case, or in capturing the criminal. So, and I think Cosby, especially when we started, he was still in prison. It felt more like the OJ thing, like what can we learn from this? And part of this came for me, even before I was ever had an opportunity to direct it, was when all the assaults came forward after Hannibal Buress's joke and Barbara Bowman's op-ed. Was I saw the article about Noni Robinson's doc about how Bill Cosby single-handedly basically integrated the black stunt industry, and now her film was it was in jeopardy of coming out because she had to remove his interview and she didn't know what she was going to do with the film. And I had never heard the story of how he integrated the black stunt industry, and so for me it was like, okay, that's history. That's not just he was funny on television. That's actual black history and American history that if we don't know, we're lesser for not knowing it. So for me, it was always about like, if we're going to tell this story, we have to tell as complete a version of the story as possible, because that way we can learn, hopefully we can learn more complete lessons from this.
100%. The trial took place in my county where I live. We're
Yeah.
small. Montgomery County is big, but we're a county of suburban homes and mom
Mm-hmm.
and dads and
Mm-hmm.
minivans. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
to have Montgomery County be at the center of this, I think one of the things that shocked me, but I shouldn't be surprised, was this was like a 50, 60-year thing.
And that's something I learned
Yeah.
as I started studying it. I think a lot of us who even believe the survivors, in some sense, you haven't read all the articles to the end. You've seen some headlines, you saw it go by on the news and you watched enough, and then you said, okay, that's enough of that. And so I think there's a way in which even those of us who support and believe the survivors sort of couch it as like, the time you heard about it is when it started. So if you heard about it in the late 90s, you sort of think it started in the late 90s. Or if you heard about it in the 2000s, you think it all happened in the 2000s. But very quickly, when we started doing the research, you found out it goes back to almost the beginning of his career as far as the accusations we know about. So to me, that changes the conversation substantially when you realize, when you know that information.
To me, it also makes me think about what was his life like when he was originally a student at Temple. What happened there that we don't know
Mm-hmm.
about? Because we know that our
Mm-hmm.
community, it goes even more underreported. And the thing that
Mm-hmm.
Black women always get told is, do you want to ruin a Black man's life? That is the thing
Thank
that
you
is
for
like
saying that.
ingrained in us, right? So that made me
Mm-hmm.
think about that, and also trying to understand it's because I believe certain behaviors are learned, Where did this
Mm-hmm.
come from? You know, on the one hand, you
Mm-hmm.
have this quote unquote picture perfect wife, and on the other hand, she, whether actively or inactively, is aware of who she
Mm-hmm.
married and who he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, where, like, are there people around that saw this from young man Bill, but just
Mm-hmm.
dismissed it? Was that something you ask yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about the O.J. Simpson doc, one of the key figures in that doc is a man named Joe Bell who knew O.J. Simpson in high school, and there's another friend of O.J. from back in the day who sort of tell the story of like here's who this guy was before he was the juice, and you go, oh, this is where. So they're sort of saying here's where some of this stuff comes from. We I think OJ is so sort of like in his own space that Joe Bell doesn't mind talking about OJ because OJ's probably not calling Joe Bell, you know. And also OJ was a sports hero. He wasn't a cultural hero. He wasn't a, you know. So whereas with Cosby, we reached out to people who knew him. They don't want to have those conversations with me. So I don't know if they want to have them at all. So we sort of very quickly understood that like we can really only cover this from the time that America met Bill Cosby, which is what I say in the piece. I can't tell you what happened before then, and to some extent, I would love to know, just because it would be great to understand. But it doesn't matter to the extent that these things still happened. But yes, we
100%.
you know.
100%. We got to talk about in our community when we love our people because of the history of racism in the world, especially in America. We tend to almost blindly support certain celebrities that we feel have done so much to push the Black narrative in a positive direction. And a good example of that is Bill Cosby. How do we have the
Mm-hmm.
conversation within each other as a community to say, kind of like what you did in this film, we can appreciate the Cosby Show because it's not just Bill Cosby. We can appreciate what he did with I Spy and children's programming and furthering education of HBCU students, right? But we have to acknowledge one, two, three, who cares if a lot of these victims are white? The point is,
Mm-hmm.
this happened. There's too much here. How do we have that balanced conversation without feeling like we're selling out one of our own, which is always a hard one?
Well, I think you alluded to this earlier. We have to do a better job of the patriarchy is real across race in this society. So, as you said, black women who are sexually assaulted by black men are told we have to protect our brothers. So we have to do a better job of prioritizing the perspective and the experiences of black women because while yes, it's the majority of the women we know about, and I think that's the key part. We know about our white women, a third of them are black women, which means we are choosing him over those black women. And that is something, as you said, we are taught to do in our community. And so for me, it starts with like really having the conversation. Why are we prioritizing one black man's experience over the experience of like, I think it's 30 black women? Why are we and embedded in that conversation is how we communicate and commune with each other. So I think that's where the conversation has to go because I understand, and we talk about this in the doc. I get the protect black men at all costs thing, but I think as we saw, it can become toxic because then if you get into an R. Kelly situation, he's out there still offending and still committing crimes and still raping and assaulting, while we're saying we can't lose a black man because our heroes are underrepresented because we don't have as many heroes as white people have. And I think that's the problem is like, but at whose expense do we need a hero? And I think when we say it's at the expense of black women, and I don't know if I can say this, but we're fucked. That's fucked. Like that is
It's no, I mean, say what you want.
Yeah, it is couldn't be more harmful to our community, is what I would say, if I can say it in the PG way. It is just ultimately harmful because that means we are letting black women go and abandoning black women for the sake of one black man.
What have you learned? Because I feel like we are in a culture right now that is so celebrity, so instant famous driven, right? Especially our young
Mm-hmm.
people. their ideas of what it takes, they're more taught to be infamous instead of doing the work, and that will get you the accolades.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned about how we are still so hung up on celebrity culture and the images that celebrities present to us versus the reality?
I mean, Bill Cosby sort of entered show business at the end of like the studio era, where Hollywood really controlled the image of the stars. Down to who you went on dates with, down to like, we're changing your name, we're lying about your age, like it's like it was really like and you had no idea what these people were doing in their private life because there was no access the way we have now. So I think what we learned is that there's an industry in place that is about controlling the narrative that then is therefore supportive of that then also controls the narrative when those people they're controlling the narrative of are committing crimes. And as we say, Bill Cosby's not the only one, because the business is like, if this person's making enough money, we have to sort of let them get away with things. And as I said before, when they built show business in the early days, they didn't go, before we start making movies and TV, let's figure out where we put the human resources department. So it is a business that is built on dreams, and if you make dreams that make enough money, then it's sort of part embedded into that is you have earned a hedonistic lifestyle, which I'm not judging that, but it just means that like, who gets to define what hedonism is where it becomes a problem.
Absolutely. And last, I want to just ask you, how do we move forward in this? Because he's a free man, right? He is allegedly, I'm going to say, trying to mount shows, and I'm gathering COVID slowed that down. But there is going to be an audience that is going to pay for that. So how do we reconcile? Again, your film is very clear. The timeline is specific. And it's one of the things I love about it, because the math adds up. It's not like, oh, kind of, sort of, you're showing opportunity, place, boom, and on to the next one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the other thing that is slowing his tour planning down, COVID, is that he's still got a couple court cases that are going through of he's being, there's a case in California. Lily Bernard has announced a case against him, and I think that it's not the time for him to go on stage and just talk freely. I don't think so. I mean, I think we do have to. I won't be surprised if at some point there is some sort of Cosby tour announced. I do think that it's not going to be some sort of worldwide tour that is backed by a major promoter, because I just don't think anybody would want to be involved in that, who has lawyers that are good lawyers So I think that like what we do, and this is why it's bigger than Cosby, the aim of the film and the conversation is like, shouldn't we create a society that is more supportive of women and women overall who've been sexually assaulted and raped? Shouldn't we create a society where if you are a person who's been sexually assaulted or raped, that you feel like, oh, I know where to go, where I can get healing, help, and justice. And I'm encouraged to go there, and people who go there get healing, help, and justice. Shouldn't it be a situation where you're not afraid of being blamed and shamed, as Lily Bernard says? And shouldn't we create a society where, from the very early ages, that sex education in schools is about more than just don't have sex? It's about, here's the toxic nature of intimacy, here's the valuable nature of intimacy, and here's the ways to support people if they're experiencing trauma in their intimacy, instead of just don't have sex, or if you do, wear a condom. But we're not going to give you condoms. Just go find a condom. So I think it's really, I'm really at this point not so much focused on the Bill Cosby of it, but like, how shouldn't we all, whether you even believe he did this or not, shouldn't we be being more invested in creating a safer society for specifically for our women in this case, and as Black people, for Black women?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I think it's a fantastic, very well thought out and caring documentary.
I really appreciate you saying that. And when I saw that somebody from Philly was on this, I was like, I really appreciate you reaching out as somebody who's from that place, who has a very different connection to this than I do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.